SN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Where is the world heading? The U.S., China, Russia, and all the other countries. Well, Doug Casey has a lot of opinions. Many of them you've heard on the show before and other places. He's with us now. He's vacationing down in beautiful Argentina. Doug, welcome back.
Thanks, Kerry. It's a pleasure to be back. But I've got to say, I'm not so much vacationing as actually living down here.
Yeah, but your life is a vacation, Doug.
Oh, the grass always looks greener, Kerry.
Yeah, I always say if the grass is greener on the other side, it's because there's a lot of fertilizer. But in your case, it seems legitimately greener.
Well, I'm fairly happy in my personal life, although I've got to say I'm not terribly happy with the way things are going in the world at large. But then again, when you're dealing with the psychological aberrations being evidenced by these people in control of the governments, which are the main source of the problems, it's always been this way.
Yeah, and these governments, they just are not happy unless everyone they're in control of are miserable, right?
Well, there's a certain type of person that's attracted to the government and that type of a job. It's a type of person that is not so much interested in controlling physical reality, which is what the normal person is interested in, but he's interested in controlling other people. And so they're naturally drawn to government because that gives them the power of a gun to tell everybody else what to do. So we don't get the best and brightest working for government. We get the worst type of people, sociopaths that are drawn to it. And at some point, when you get so many of these people, when the government gets powerful enough, the few decent people that work for the government, for whatever reasons, are actually driven out. So we're approaching that stage in the U.S. and in a lot of other countries around the world, too.
Yeah, I mean, look at a country like Russia. You got this Putin, who they say he's worth $75 billion. Who knows how much he's worth because he can just help himself to the Russian treasury anytime he likes. He can literally write himself a check. Look at the Chinese government. The top 60 members of the Communist Party are all multi-billionaires. And it goes on all over the world. And it makes you kind of hopeless for the future of mankind as long as these people are in charge of things, doesn't it?
Yes, of course. That's a very good point. Today, the best and easiest way to make big money is to get into politics. And that is true all over the world. And of course, it's absolutely true in the United States as well. Although we're a somewhat high-trust society, more than places like Russia, so the people like Bill Clinton, who you remember when he had the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and he was saying, I don't have any money, and I hope people will contribute to pay my legal fees. And he didn't have any money back then. I mean, even the $100,000 that Hillary stole that was disguised as a cattle trading venture was nothing for the legal fees. But he's gotten his payoff now that he's out of office. You got multi-million-dollar book contracts and multi-million-dollar speaking fees, speaking fees. You get huge consulting deals. You get corporate directorships. You get the sweetheart deals that you're put into. So Bill's probably worth $100 billion now.
Yeah, and you look at W. He's gotten his book deals and business deals, and his family was wealthy long before he ever cast his eye upon the presidency. And no doubt the Obamas are going to go out extremely wealthy. And,
oh, yeah.
And you look at the members of Congress. I remember I had an advertising teacher in college who said, people go to Congress to get wealthy. And I believed it then, and of course now it's truer than ever.
Oh, absolutely. And this kind of relates to a concept that has been getting some traction in the world of memes called deep state. the concept of deep state was actually originated with the Ottoman Empire, the new version of the Byzantine Empire, which is appropriate. It's where we get the word Byzantine intrigue and so forth. And a lot of people have been writing about this. The high government officials, not all the government officials, but the ones on top, the military, the secret police, and members of the mafia, they're there as kind of a secondary state. It's not what you read about in your civics book where the Congress, who are all Jimmy Stewart guys and all that. These people are strictly out for their own interests, and they actually have their own club. It's like that George Carlin video. He said, it's a big club, and you ain't in it.
And if you have any morals and any ethics, you don't want to be in it either, do you?
No, you don't want to be in it, actually, because, as I said, the people that are attracted to government are essentially criminal personalities. They like to control other people, not reality. So I expect things are going to be getting worse from this point forward, because since we entered the financial hurricane in 2007, it's been papered over and with trillions of currency units created all over the world. And now we're in the eye of the storm, but very possibly this year we're going to come out of it and go into the trailing edge of the hurricane. And it's going to be really, really severe and last much, much longer and be much scarier than what happened in 2008 and so.
So do you think the Chinese have masterfully played this hand and they're just going to get out of it unscathed? They'll just go one day, say, okay, we have a gold-backed yuan and everything's okay? Or they've just created more currency units than anybody else, and now they've got this shadow banking empire collapsing around them, and they're going to have their own host of problems as well.
Well, I've got to say that it's immensely impressive what's happened in China since Deng Xiaoping opened the place up in the early 80s. I mean, the progress has been breathtaking and it's been real. The whole thing with communism and Mao Tse-tung was just an aberration, just a blip on the 5,000-year screen of Chinese history. So that said, they're going to have severe problems as well. There's been the banking system in China is totally bankrupt. And the problem is that all these yuan, all these currency units that have been created have been used to finance ghost cities and huge misallocations of capital, things done for political purposes, not business purposes. And when these things go bankrupt and can't pay back the banks, the people who've deposited money in the banks are going to be very unhappy. And you don't want 1 billion unhappy Chinese who thought they were getting rich and all the money they put in the banks isn't there anymore. So the business cycle will exist in China, and the business cycle exists everywhere where you have currency inflation. So it's good news, bad news.
Yeah, and the fact is they can't afford to have 500 million people who left the rural areas seeking a better life in the urban areas, all of a sudden out of work with no food. That's a recipe for insurrection and bad news for the ruling class, isn't it?
Well, it is actually, because their economy is built on exporting things to the West. And if the West is not in a position to buy them, if everybody is already storing all kinds of cheap junk that they bought in China in their paying rent to a storage unit because they don't have room for it in the house, they're not going to be able to be manufacturing that much more. And the people making it are going to be unemployed. They're in the cities. So these things are cyclical. I mean, they've had a fantastic run for the last 35 years. And there have been a lot of distortions and misallocations of capital cranked into the market. So it's going to have to sort out, and that could be unpleasant. But this is true all over the world. It's true in Japan in a different way. Their currency system and the amount of debt that they have there is actually much worse than either the U.S. or China. And then, of course, Europe, where essentially everybody's on welfare. So there's going to be a global reset, is my feeling. And we're coming up on it soon.
Yeah, so the piper's got to get paid. The excesses have to be wrung out of the system, and effectively liquidation has to take place. And the longer you don't allow it to occur, the worse the eventuality becomes, right?
That's exactly right. And what concerns me, especially in addition to the economic consequences, is that when times get tough, political people like to blame somebody else as opposed to their own policies. And very often, that's another country. It's those damned Arabs for taking the price of oil so high. It's those damn Chinese for creating all these cheap things that Americans can't afford to make here in this country, on and on. And so what really scares me is the prospect of a serious war, not just a sport war, some stupid adventure like in Afghanistan or Iraq. I'm talking about a serious war against big game.
Right. And that we'll talk more about this serious war up next on the Financial Survival Network.
When your accountant wants tax-free income, this is what he does. Accountants know the law. They also know that any American could legally get paid up to 3 times per month, 100% tax-free. That's 36 tax-free checks each year. It doesn't matter what you make already. This simple strategy could work for anyone. Go to www.irsrevenge2.com to learn how. That's IRSRevenge2.com.
And we are back on the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. We're talking with Doug Casey at Casey Research. So the big war, that's a world war, and there are those who believe there's a 100-year war cycle. Go back to World War I, War of 1812, go back to 1712, and on and on and on. It goes for like over 1,000 years. And you thinking that that's in the cards now, or do we pull back from the precipice? I mean,
well, there's been a lot of thought on this for a long time. Of course, the Kondratiev wave is it a 65-year cycle that makes some intuitive sense. Their economy booms, and then it slows down, and then when it busts, they have a war. They're looking to blame somebody else, and then the dust settles and people work hard and save, and it goes back to a boom again. So that could be part of the picture. What really disturbs me at the moment is the fact that the U.S. government is spending more on military and police and intelligence, so-called, than all the rest of the countries in the world put together. And about the only thing in the U.S. government that appears to even work is the military. And worse than that, everybody loves the military. It's become like the national religion in the U.S. to see some refugee from the barrios or the ghettos or the trailer parks who tend to join the military, some of it for so-called patriotic reasons, but some of it just because it's a really good, high-paying job where everybody bows down before you. And, this cult of the military is a very disturbing thing, because once you have such a gigantic, big golden hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And so I'm very concerned that the U.S. military is going to stick its nose into someplace really serious, and that's going to be big trouble.
And could that place be the Ukraine? Or, you look at a guy like Putin, what are his aspirations here?
Well, I'm not concerned about Putin. I mean, look, Russia and then the Soviet Union, ever since day one, they've had czars or dictators, and Putin's just another in a long line of these people. I'm more concerned about the U.S. at this point. The Russians aren't going to try to invade something else, and the Crimea has historically been part of Russia, A, and B, they actually had a poll, and from everything I'm able to determine, it was not a rigged poll. It was a real poll where most of the people preferred to be part of Russia as opposed to part of the Ukraine. Now, I don't believe in the nation state as a way of organizing people. I think that all these 220 some nation states that cover the surface of the globe like a skin disease are going to dry up and blow away in the next century. But that's the next century. That said, right now, Crimea really is a Russian province, and it was given to the Ukrainians for his own reasons by Nikita Khrushchev back in the early 50s, because Khrushchev was half Ukrainian himself. So, that foible on his part's come back to bite everybody. I don't see the problem so much in the Ukraine. For all we know, it could be those Senkaku Islands and maybe the Ryukyus in between Japan and China that the U.S. idiotically has pledged itself to go to war against the Chinese if the Chinese attack the Japanese. There could be a dozen flashpoints in the world like that, not to mention that the U.S. makes a practice out of sending carrier battle groups into the Persian Gulf to antagonize the Iranians. How would they like it if the Iranians sent a battle fleet 20 miles off the coast of the U.S., off of New York? That's provocative.
Sure.
Yeah, and it serves no useful purpose. And meanwhile, spending all this money on the military, when you add up all the military and these agencies, we're talking about $1 trillion per year that comes out of American taxpayers' pockets, or has to be borrowed from the Chinese, or the debt has to be sold to the Federal Reserve, which is going to destroy the U.S. dollar. So the U.S. military, far from defending our freedoms, which it no longer does, is actually a major impetus to bankrupting the average American.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's a lot of flashpoints in the world right now, and it just takes one guy to screw it up. It reminds me of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where at one point, a plane flies over, and at that point, World War III could have easily started.
It could have.
Right at that point.
Yes, it really could have. And, interestingly, if the North Koreans, certainly the most backward and primitive country in the world, have been able to create 3 nuclear warheads, really almost anybody, probably even a wealthy upper middle class family in the U.S. could create their own nuclear weapons. And in fact, any nation state in the world could create them. And considering that the kind of people that get into government are neither the most moral nor the most stable, it's a very scary situation.
Yeah, and especially now, it seems like the government in the United States is more incompetent than it's ever been before. And as far as foreign relations, they don't seem to have a clue because, Doug, with the overthrow in the Ukraine, you had to expect that the Russians were going to respond to protecting their ports on the Black Sea. They've had those ports for 300 years. They had military presence there. Their naval presence was there, had personnel stationed there. There's no way that they were just going to let those ports go. It was impossible, and yet the U.S. couldn't foresee that this was going to happen. The EU didn't see it was going to happen. Of course it was going to happen. I remember studying this in junior high school when junior high existed. There's no way they were going to let this go, and yet the entire Western world is surprised about it.
Well, it shows how completely worthless organizations like the CIA and the NSA are, that whatever data that they have, they don't understand it enough to make any predictions. I mean, ever since it was founded, the CIA has dropped every single ball that's been passed to them. They didn't know the Koreans were going to get into a war back in the 50s. they're wrong way Corrigans. If the president of the U.S. wants actual information about what's going on elsewhere in the world, he's probably better off reading the New York Times every morning, although I certainly don't trust the New York Times either. But the information that's fed to him, who knows what the agenda is with whoever's running the CIA giving. These are gigantic bureaucracies that have a life of their own and their own agendas, and it has nothing to do with what's good for America or the average American anymore.
Yeah, in fact, probably the contrary. And maybe you'd be better off reading The Economist or listening to BBC because, just going back to Iraq invading Kuwait, had no idea that was going to happen. The fall of the Soviet Union, while that was somewhat orchestrated, didn't know that was going to happen. And on and on and on. Everything seems to catch the U.S. by surprise, for good or for bad. And I think you're right. The nation state, it's kind of a concept that seems to have become completely obsolete and archaic, an anachronism, if you will. And, maybe before the end of the next century, it's going to kind of see its place in the dustbin of history.
Yes, I'd really like to think so, because coercion is a very bad thing, and the state is all about organized coercion, that the worst people are always in charge of it. So I'm much more a believer in society organizing itself along the lines of a free market. And the state sticks its nose into everything today, just making enemies at home and abroad. It's so scary. I'm here in Argentina right now, and I actually don't look forward to coming back to the U.S. anymore. Just going through the interrogation process at customs and immigration, where you don't know at this point if you're going to be thrown into a back room for however long, and then having to deal with these lowlifes at the TSA, which it still, to me, is unbelievable that they can round up 60,000 generally middle-aged people, not just kids that are looking for a summer job. We're talking middle-aged people that would actually put on a costume and feel up their fellow citizens. And what's even more disgusting is watching my fellow Americans go through TSA. They smile and make small talk and supplicating gestures to these horrible people. So I guess the average American's pretty much getting what he deserves.
Yeah, I hate to think that. Well, Doug, hey, thanks so much for being on. It's always a pleasure. And you're doing great work at caseyresearch.com, the daily newsletter. I never miss it. And your interviews, always great. So we've always got a link at financialsurvivalnetwork.com, often linked to your articles. And one of these days, we will see you down in Argentina, and looking forward to seeing you at Freedom Fest this July.
I'll be there, Kerry. I look forward to seeing you too.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.